one of the things I liked about the punk at the time were the real antisocial names, Dead Kennedys and stuff like that. So Jerry's Kids, the Jerry Lewis Telethon was a big thing going on in Albuquerque back then. So that was the Jerry's Kids. Later to find out there was a Jerry's Kids in Austin, a Jerry's Kids in Boston, and another one or two.
Yeah, we're telling the Gordy story.
It's a long-winded story, I'll tell
I
you.
love it. It's really nice to see your face and talk to you and can hear your story. You look great.
Thanks. I took a shower right before this because I stunk. When you were talking with Dave and you were talking about lyrics, there was a song that always stuck with me that I'm pretty sure we both collaborated on. It was called Reagan's America. Reagan's America, what's in it for me? The draft, more taxes, and poverty. Well, that line was me, Dave. Dun, 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 dun. Wake up from your Iranian dream. Ronnie Reagan's going to ruin everything. Because it's middle-aged men with their heads in their sand. They're running the world. Pay for it here, fight for it there. They're running the world. Reagan's America, what's in it for me? The draft, more taxes, and poverty. Dave refuses to take credit for anything. He always says it was Kevin or me, but Dave Duran is one of the more brilliant wordsmiths to come out of this town, come out of the scene, period. And I'm not the only one that feels that way. All our other bandmates, all Dave, who I met at the big ass ditch here in town. They called it the Bear because it was a tributary to the main flood control ditch and like 35, 45-foot high walls, harsh transitions. And at that time, like Dave was saying, the locals were still skating 28-inch, regular size skateboards. And one day, these two guys show up that none of us knew on these big ass longboards. Now, the locals would start about halfway up the wall because it's so gnarly. These guys are starting at the top and just flying down. And with those long boards, when they'd hit the transition, it didn't buck them off like it did on a shorter board. And we were all amazed and mesmerized and fell in love with these two guys. We're like, who the fuck are these guys? The Duran brothers from California. And yeah, we became real good friends. I had a car and I'd go rescue them from an all high and we'd go out, whatever, visit people like Steve Island and stuff in the Heights. And that was the other thing. It seemed like during those days, the younger people that were into the music and the scene pretty much came from either El Dorado High School or Highland High. Those were the main high school. A lot of the people that you've already interviewed, Steve Island, a lot of those guys were all from Highland High. And then the Jerry's Kids guys, Kevin, Brandon, etc., they all went to El Dorado. Eldo. I graduated from Sandia High. I attended it sparsely and went to a alternative high school as well in 10th and 11th grade called community school, which was sort of like the other end of this. You had to have like a 3-point something average to get into it. It was for kids that weren't on the dropout scale, but were like bored with the regular curriculum because they had, and I somehow qualified for that. I just liked it because it was small classes in non-school settings, and there's a lot of really pretty girls that went there. My dad, who was a musician in high school and college, played in his high school and college marching bands, played French horn and cornet, was the one that made sure that we all picked an instrument and went on with music, and I stuck with it. Picked the guitar, and it was an acoustic guitar, Pimentel guitar. Took lessons at the YMCA from Larry McGinnis. And so that year, my parents saw that I was into it and I was practicing. So Santa Claus brought me that guitar that Christmas, which was cool, but I was bummed because I wanted an electric guitar because I was really getting into rock music. And so I went to Radio Shack and bought a little contact microphone and clipped it into the F hole of the acoustic guitar and played it to my dad's stereo and bought a fuzz pedal and a wah-wah pedal. And that was the beginning of my rock dominance or whatever. That dominance didn't happen until later in Jerry's Kids, where first punk rock would be like Minutemen, Black Flag, SST bands. I had heard the first punk rock I heard was the stuff coming out of Europe and then New York. And I liked the more brutal stuff, like out of New York was James White and the Blacks, or James Chance. And I remember listening to KUNM in one afternoon freeform, and the guy played James James White and the Blacks, this song "I Can't Stand Myself," that's real crazy and a lot of rhythm. As far as my playing with Jerry's Kids, in Jerry's Kids specifically, I always felt that my right hand should be going as fast as the drummer's right hand. So I played pretty fast. It took me really until basically the last band that was functional that I was in was called Black Maria. And that was the first time I ever played solos, really. Although the other guitar player in Black Maria says, "No, I've heard you play solos before." And it wasn't so much solos, it was just I would take a break from playing chords and just play the single notes that were like the chords. I don't know. People give me more credit than I think I deserve for my musicianship. I'm an amateur that just tried to figure out shit on his own without any real training or knowledge, and lucked out in finding like-minded people that allowed me to do my dorky shit. Uh, 79, 80, maybe.
Okay.
No, I take that. 77, 76. I was real into music, so I always had subscriptions to music magazines, Circus, Rolling Stone, Cream. So I was aware there was this thing in England, punk rock, the Sex Pistols, the Damned, and stuff like that. But I couldn't find those records in Albuquerque at that time. And then it moved from Europe into the East Coast. And then there was a record store in the university area called Natural Sound. And they started carrying that stuff because the art students at UNM were new wavers. They were into this alternative stuff. And so, yeah, we rudely and crudely referred to that group of people as the art fags because they did not like us little snotty guys showing up to their, because the only way to hear this music in a public venue was usually, like Dave said, parties. And most of those parties were these UNM art students who were less than thrilled to see these little jackasses with their little skate pads on and stuff. And we weren't pogoing like they were. We were what eventually became known as a slam. We called it thrashing. We just thrash around and elbow each other and push each other around. Eventually became known as the Huntington Beach strut or slam dancing. But we just did it because we were kooky skate kids and thought that pogoing was dork. And it was, especially back then, it was very important not to be dork, but to be rad.
To be rad.
Stuff was either rad or dork. Now that's dork. Oh, that's rad, man. Those were the social benchmarks of which we lived our lives and played our music.
Where between rad and dork?
Yeah. Skateboarding, you want it to be rad. You wanted to skate vertical. You wanted to catch air. You didn't want to be dork and just do little freestyle on the flat ground and little cutesy tricks like that. Yeah. Rad, dork.
But then suddenly one day everyone decided to be punk rock, and now you just stop giving a shit when anyone else thinks. Start doing it your own way.
Well, and that was what was one of the attractions to that whole thing to me was not only the DIY, but the who cares what others think. I was bummed that I was too young to be like a hippie. I was real into like the 60s radicals, Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman and all that. They had this book that Abby Hoffman, I think, wrote called Steal This Book. I was way into that 60s subversive subculture thing and was bummed that I was too young to actually participate. Because my parents wouldn't let me out of the house to go down to UNM to Yale Park and protest and smoke weed or whatever. But as I got older, that sort of thing had sort of socially faded, but yet morphed into this punk thing. And so I dove into that. And a lot of the punk stuff too, we became aware of through Skateboarder magazine. We were real big on skateboarding, and that was before videos. To know what the pros and the cool guys in Cali were doing, you bought Skateboarder magazine and saw the pictures. And then we found out that the guys from Santa Monica were our true heroes. They're the rad guys. Tony Alva, Stacy Peralta, Jay Adams, guys like that. And when they started listening to this music, this punk or new wave, of course we had to because we wanted to emulate our heroes. And then we go, wow, this stuff rocks. And the fact that it was so available to be a non-technical musician but start a band, I got together with Kevin Cruikshank and said, Kevin said, well, you got a guitar And you know these chords, let's start a band, man, let's start a band. And I liked, one of the things I liked about the punk at the time were the real antisocial names, you know, Dead Kennedys and stuff like that. So Jerry's Kids, the Jerry Lewis Telethon was a big thing going on in Albuquerque back then. So that was the Jerry's Kids. Later to find out there was a Jerry's Kids in Austin, a Jerry's Kids in Boston, and another one or two. And I was big on letter writing before the internet. I used to write letters all the time. I had pen pals. So I wrote to those other Jerry's Kids and said, hey, why don't we all get together somewhere and play a show that's all bands named Jerry's Kids? The Austin guys thought that was brilliant. The guys in Boston were a bunch of stuck up dill holes, and they thought they didn't respond at first. I had to keep writing and menacing them, and they're like, oh, that's a stupid idea. We're the only Jerry's Kids that counts, and all this snotty back east bullshit. So we were like, fuck those guys. Broed down with the Austin guys, but never got to play with them. There's this there's a story about the history of the name Jerry's Kids. What else? What else would you like to know? When I was in sixth grade and on through what we called junior high back then in high school. In high school, I had friends who played in bands that got gigs, but they were all cover bands. They played popular music at the time and then would play at dances. And I didn't have the technical skills to be in those bands, but I'd hung out at all their practices, and now and then I'd pick up my harmonica because I could play harmonica pretty good. And I'd jam along with them, or I'd borrow a guy's guitar and play the 3 or 4 chords that I knew. But yeah, it was awesome. So I was a big harmonica guy and would actually get a chance to play with like college age people because I could play the harmonica, and the peer group I was in weren't really hip to blues and jazz, just pop, rock, and pop. And I was always a big music head and went out of my way to learn about stuff like jazz and its different permutations of jazz and blues, excuse me. It always perplexed me. There's a style of jazz, I call it esoteric, fragmented, freeform jazz, where it's like that real skronky, squonky stuff that just sounds like chaos. And I always wondered why people other than me didn't associate that with punk rock. And when I had a freeform show for many years on KUNM, the public radio station, I would play those two different styles together and try to make people go, oh, yeah, all right, all right. Not try to put boundaries and separations between these different genres, I guess you'd say. But yeah, KUNM was a big thing for me, partially because it was mainly the paid staff and most of the other volunteers were members of what I call the cosmic cowboy music scene, the more mellow, the Eagles and all this other crap. And I actually pulled like Black Flag and Circle Jerk albums out of the garbage from the program director. She thought this stuff was just bullshit and threw it away. So I would play, and then they didn't know what to do with me because of my knowledge. I could play jazz and blues, the music that they adored so much, and I would interject this hardcore. And I just remember one time one of the women that was a full-time employee there came and said, why do you, I was playing Suicidal Tendencies, you know, I one was a Pepsi. And I remember she came in and she was just, why is so much of this music you play so angry? I said, it's just angry time.
But was KUNM before Jerry's Kids when you worked there?
Yeah, it was sort of the same time. I was trying to get in before I worked at the university. I started working at the university in 1979, but I was listening to KUNM when I was like, I discovered him when I was like in like 1972, 73. And I always wanted to be a part of it. It's like community radio, and it's mainly volunteers from the community there. And they would not let me in. And I was just so bummed. And I started working at the university. I was delivering mail on campus, UNM post office. And one of my stops was KUNM. And I thought, well, here's my chance to get in. And it sort of was. There was a student employee that was this young woman that was working the phones in the front desk, who later became my first ex-wife, and this other girl who I didn't get married to, but we were together for a long time. And she was also had a early Sunday morning freeform show that I sort of hogged my way into, and then through that got myself known by the staff by participating in the remote broadcasts. They did a lot of remote broadcasting. Cool thing where they did every gospel music choir in town at all the different Baptist churches. And so, and then they did Out of Joint at the Joint, where they had live bands playing up at the prison in the yard for the
I
prisoners and
remember you
shit.
telling me this. Yeah.
Yeah, so these remotes required people to, you had to have a lot of equipment to broadcast remote. And so I got in good with the staff because I would show up to help load all that crap in. I had a UNM driver's license already, so I could drive these vans. I could check the vans out from the motor pool, which is real helpful to them. And so that got me in good with the grown-ups at KUNM, who eventually let me take over the New Wave show when the two people that were doing that, this man and this woman, were doing that, who were sort of hip to what was going on, but not really. And I would substitute when they were going to be absent. And so when they decided they wanted to move on from being on the radio, they were really responsible for making sure I got that shift. They really advocated for me and pointed out the times I'd substituted for them and how good I was. But like I said, the program manager of the station did not like that kind of music that I loved. And I was pulling these albums out of the garbage, and I would bring a lot of my own albums too to play on the air. And that was great because a lot of people, a lot of, the more older hippie listeners would be sort of taken aback and freaked out by it. But then at the same time, a lot of them understood where it was coming from and where I was coming from with it. And I don't know, I think it helped that kind of music in Albuquerque in that short period of time. It helped it become known and accepted. Or maybe that's just my ego blowing up this whole thing. I don't know.
Well, you earned your own respect at UNM as an employee.
Yeah, I wasn't a ass kisser, but I knew how to communicate. And it was noticed by my bigger bosses how well I could deal with like entry level little vato blue collar guys and then turn around and deal with these real high order pissy research and medical doctors that were all man, 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 man. And my bosses thought, wow, you really have skills in communicating. And that's how I got to get up into whatever mid-level, whatever level of management I eventually got into. Because to get to those, one of the prerequisites was a college degree, which I didn't have. But they looked past that because I had the skills needed that maybe some college dork wouldn't have. UNM became what started out as just another job, and it turned into a career. And it turned out it treated me really well. I get kind of choked up thinking about it because to this day, I mean, I've got for the rest of my life, I've got 8 hours of tuition at an extreme discount that I can either take or pass on to a spouse or significant other, which is during those days when I was married and whatever, it was always women who were students. And so help them defer their expenses by passing my waiver on to them. But just another story on the subject of the different clubs and the show promotions I did. It was mainly community centers that were available because of my experience with Boy Scouts and student council. I knew how to communicate. I knew how to use a phone. And I would, well, I wouldn't lie, but I'd sort of fluff up the truth and say, yes, we're going to have a teen dance and there'll be a live band playing. And for the young people to come, I wouldn't say, it's a bunch of punk rock kids with weird hair who are going to be slam dancing. And it shook up a lot of the community center because they would have a representative from the community center there to just make sure everything was cool. And then they'd freak out. They'd see this huge guy like Steve Island, and they'd see these kids with mohawks and stuff back way before people were giving their little babies mohawks. And, hair back then was that 70s feathered hair. And so if you had spiky, weird hair, a flat top, a crew cut, a mohawk especially, it stops traffic. And people were like, jocks and frat guys would hassle you and go, "Hey, Devo!" and try to fight you and stuff. And cops, yeah, cops, yeah, forget about the bad boys. Bad boys. In the cops' mind in this town in the late 70s and early 80s, based on our appearance, we were bad. And it was just bullshit.
They did not like you and your shows.
They didn't like our appearance and therefore apparently didn't like the shows because it had a bunch of people that looked freaky and they weren't dancing like they would dance at the police benevolent hall. bunch of kids thrashing around and stuff, looked like fighting, and yeah, it was just it. So
But you booked
anyway,
these shows at various parts of town
absolutely.
as well, like Trumbull Community Center, South Valley
all these
Community
different commu-
Centers.
all these different all these different community centers and like the Elks Lodge, these organizations. And then at one point in time, my first ex-wife and I thought, what we need to do is find a space that we could rent to put shows on instead of having to always find a community center that hadn't gotten the word that we were trouble or whatever. And so I had a coworker whose family was involved was involved in real estate around here, and they knew of this abandoned like whole little strip mall thing at Five Points, and
Okay.
whatever. So my first wife and I, we rented a old Zales jewelry space in this abandoned strip mall and opened Test Site Studios. And that's where we put all these shows on, this big parking lot, so a lot of people could come and park and not be freaking any of the squares out. I had sense enough, and the cops would sit in that parking lot to watch Five Points to see if people were running the light and shit. So I went up and introduced myself to the police, told them what I was doing here. It's a teen dance hall. More shit. I said,
Dance hall.
there's going to be some weird looking kids, but they said, the thing they didn't like was the drinking out in the parking lot. They said, as long as you keep your drinking and drugs inside your place, we got no problem with you guys. And it was great because there were like local vatos that did not like the idea of a bunch of white kids with weird hair coming into their part of the town. And we were protected by these cops, which blew our minds. Like the same cops that were like hassling us last year down by UNM for our weird looks that were now keeping the vatos from kicking our ass and trashing our cars. So yeah. And I would promote those shows mainly through trying to get KUNM to do PSA, public service announcements, and then did a lot of flyers. And we would just, all the way through practically Black Maria, it'd always be like Chris Partain and I, we were real big on flyering, and we would go up and down Central around from like Nob Hill down to University Boulevard and hit every pole, and other bands or other events would be on these flyers. We covered up, super tape it. I worked in the shipping and receiving department, so I always had access to the real wide, heavy duty packing tape, and we would laminate our flyers to these poles. And I don't know, we had a lot of fun doing that. So that was like the main forms of promotion. And then, like I said, most of these kids that were into that either went to El Dorado or Highland. And so guys like Steve Island or at Highland or Kevin Cruikshank or Mike Prothero up at Eldo would tell all the other kids what was going on. And after a while, by the mid 80s, there were enough like articles in Time magazine and stuff about the punk rock phenomena that kids were aware of it, like we were before we got fully into it. And all of those guys, like Dave and his group of friends at Highland, consisted of a lot of musicians. There's a band of Dave's friends who were also our friends, had a band called Corfu, which was almost like a jazz fusion band. They were real cool, and they loved us, and they would always want to play shows with us, which was great because it brought two different tribes, two different species of animals together to enjoy music. And the hardcore punks all dug Corfu, and Corfu's fans, who were a little more sophisticated, more art student like, they liked the energy and the look of Jerry's Kids and our fans. And we would tell people like Mike Prothero and Steve Allen, don't fucking beat these people up. They're cool. And so everything turned out okay. So,
Part of the
so
story.
but you talking about the Duran brothers and their influence. And the way I met them was at this major skateboard spot. I think we were saying there's one of the tributaries to the main flood control system, and it said Oso. The city had painted Oso on the sign, Spanish for bear. So we started skating it. We called it the Bear, and it's pretty legendary to this day. It gets written up in skate magazines, and it's in different videos because it's so dramatic. And we were the locals. we're on these short boards, and the transition was pretty severe. So we were starting maybe halfway, 3/4 up these 45-foot high walls. And one day, these two guys with these long boards show up, and they're starting at the top, and they're even pushing down. And we were just like, who the hell are these guys? So we went and befriended those guys. Turned out to be Dave and Mark Duran, who were who had lived in California, where we all wished that we were because of the skateboard scene out there. We were big fans of the stuff that was coming out of Santa Monica, Dogtown, Tony Alva, Jay Adams, Stacy Peralta, Jay Adams, a lot of those guys, Bob Baniak. They were our skateboard heroes via the magazines and the stories that we read. And some of those guys would get sponsored by a store that was maybe selling skateboards and bring them out here for a demo. And we'd take these guys to our local spots. And the first time Tony Alva came out, he was all pompous, and it was a skate demo at the old soapbox derby track near the airport of runways, west of the runways. And Alva was all rad and hauling ass and beating all the locals. Then we take him to our spot, this ditch, and his first run, he hit those harsh. When we told him you need to take the transitions at an angle, we even made little spray paint spots. We're taking an angle at that spot and then go an angle at the spot across, and you'll go up. Because if you go straight down or straight up, you're going to get thrown from your board. Well, Tony Alva, the world champion skateboarder, he knew more than a bunch of goobers from Albuquerque. Starts at the top, pushes really hard and goes straight down, hits the transition, starts wobbling, hits the one to go up, thrown from his board, face down, all pissed, takes his board, throws it, and goes, "This ditch is unskateable," which then became legendary graffiti on that ditch for a decade and a half. "This ditch is unskateable." Tony Alva, 1976. So, yeah, the skateboard scene out here was a lot different than even the rad stuff that we were thinking was cool, mainly because of this vast network of cemented in arroyos, which were all getting cemented in the mid to late 70s, around the time we were all discovering each other and skateboarding. And there was a one kid that was part of the skateboard crew and a big, always hung out at the Jerry's Kids practices. And he had a job working for this company that was cementing in these ditches. So he had the inside scoop of all these new ditches. Oh yeah, you need to go over Morris and Montgomery or whatever, and there's a new ditch and the transitions are round. I talked to the supervisor and said, yeah, we had to make these round because then the water will flow better. And they thought, oh, that's a great idea, son. And that became the Morris Ditch, which was for a long time was one of the big places where the hardcore skaters skated, which happened to be physically located right near where Kevin Cruikshank's parents lived, where Jerry's Kids practiced, and had a gigantic half pipe in the backyard and a big quarter pipe in the driveway. The true heroes of the Albuquerque music and skate scene aren't Dave Duran, aren't me, aren't Kevin Cruikshank. It's John and Doris Cruikshank, Kevin's parents, who are the most tolerant, sweet people who allowed us to devaluate their home by putting these gnarly ramps on their property, and then made it worse by having this obnoxiously loud band practice at ridiculous volumes 5, 6 nights a week. The neighbors hated it. It's funny. I'd go into the house to go to the bathroom, and there'd be his sweet little parents sitting there watching their TV program with their little headphones on. And we were literally rattling pictures off the wall and shit off the shelves because we only knew one level to play, which was ridiculously loud, which I carried that into my two other bigger bands that I was in, which was Cracks in the Sidewalk and then Black Maria. I was in a band for a little while called the Pepsi Generation as their token older cool guy, punk guy with a cred. And what's that? Scene band.
No, Satan. Didn't you have a band that was like short lived that was they had Satan in the name, and it was like maybe a cover band or a band about.
My friend Deb's remembering a band that I was in that had the word Satan in it, but I can't bring that memory up. Yeah, I understand. My brain is just saturated and coated with THC.
Your brain has got a lot of important history in there. You just keep talking about whatever you want.
The skate scene sort of begat the tattoo scene here in town. There was a guy who had gone to undergrad school, art school in the University of Arizona, whose family lived out here. He moved back here and was living with his folks. And his style of art was just, it was fucking rad. We loved it. His name was Jamie Trujillo. He's now a well-known illustrator and tattoo artist. I started Jamie tattooing in my little apartment in Ridgecrest. Called it the tree house because it was surrounded by all these trees. It had these 4 big windows on each wall. And I helped Jamie acquire a tattoo gun and a machine and all that stuff. We started tattooing underage kids in the treehouse tattoo parlor. A lot of guys got their first tattoos up there when they were like 15, 16 years old. Don't tell your parents where you got this. Wear sleeves around the house and stuff. And yeah, that's how a
You
lot of.
took them snacks and drinks and stuff.
I was a great host, and that was true. I did. I always had, like tea or lemonade and stuff and snacks. And because, sometimes getting tattooed, you get kind of woozy, it's punishment to your body. And so, yeah, I was a cool guy with that stuff. Plus, if you got known for doing that kind of thing, more pretty girls would come to get their tattoos. And there's another chance to mac on pretty girls who were not getting naked, but okay, want to get a little dolphin on my shoulder, so she had to take her shirt partial way off or whatever, and the yin yang dolphin. So yeah, I was a sleazy guy, but that was like tied into the skateboard scene because all the hardcore skaters and all our heroes were getting tattooed, and it was a mid to late 80s when tattooing was coming out of the prison slash sailor. I mean, when I first started getting tattoos, people at the university are like, this is one of my first ones. And they say, well, what are you like? Were you in prison or were you a sailor or something? It's like, they didn't understand that it would become what it is now, a personal aesthetic, like a hairstyle or piercings. You tattoo
Cultural.
yourself.
It's
Yeah,
cultural. I always
cultural
say
phenomenon.
we're from the southwestern United States. It's part of our culture.
And it definitely was started by my friends and I culturally. Again, way to go.
Yeah, way to go. Thanks for that. And so one day you just said, "Hey Jamie, draw us a flyer for this show."
Yep.
And Jamie's
Jamie and
flyer
he had
went
this really
viral.
he had Jamie and his real good friend R.K. Sloan, Rick Sloan, and his wife Terry Corbin. R.K. Sloan was a really noted underground cartoonist. Actually, was hired or commissioned by Ed Big Daddy Roth to do the Ratfink cartoon series. And his wife Terry, she was such a lovely person. I actually married them. I'm an ordained minister, and at one point they asked me to they're like, we've been together for 18 years, living together. We should probably get married. So would you mind coming over and doing the wedding? And it was great. And so as a thank you at that time, Rick was also doing ceramic stuff. And so for doing their wedding, he gave me this killer lamp, which I need help. I'm trying to hold this lamp up to the camera. Can you see it? And it was a gift from Rick and Terry for marrying them. I mean, I didn't become the bride or the husband, but I was the officiant that performed. You were asking Dave about lyrics and political motivations and stuff. And I already sort of said that song "Reagan's America" that I thought was which Dave claims he didn't write, that it was Kevin and I. But Dave is so modest; he hardly wants to take credit for anything. But I know that Dave wrote that song. And he certainly sang it with fucking style and class. One of the greatest frontmen you could ever hope for. I was so sad when he moved back to the Bay Area, but then he was in this brilliant band, Clown Alley. And the bass player for a long time was Shirley Temple's daughter, the child actress. And then they were just a great band. And so we would go on tour. We would not only stay with Dave and Mark, who lived in this badass story flat on Haight Street, but would get these great shows because his band and Mark's band too. Mark was in with Helios Creed. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Helios Creed. Helios Creed is a guy and the name of a band. Dave's brother Mark played bass for Helios Creed and is on a couple of Helios Creed albums as the bass player. And that in that band, that instrument was pretty much like, in my opinion, like the lead instrument. So
Really?
it was really cool. Mark, yeah. So
I'm
anyway,
I'm going back to Jerry's Kids a little bit. So like they're skating, you're a skater, and then you're like influenced by this whole movement going on and this music. Let's start a band, guys. And Dave was your second
yeah,
singer. So
yeah. Kevin said we should start a band. Kevin and I started really getting into that music, going to the one record store in town where if they didn't have it, they'd order it. It was called Natural Sound. It used to be on Harvard, and they would order that music for us because some of the employees were like hipster KUNM people and stuff. And I can't remember where I was going with that. You're asking me.
Jerry's Kids, just more about forming the band and
Okay, yeah. So we were into this music and we were skating all the time. I mean, I'd get off work. I mean, 5-6 days a week easily until sunset. We would skate these ditches and then these ramps. We'd skate all night because we put lights up and stuff. And like I said, our skateboard heroes were listening to this kind of music, so we started listening to it. And one day came, and I had a guitar. I had my Pimentel acoustic guitar. I didn't have an electric guitar. I wasn't really playing the guitar that much, but Kevin Cruikshank one day he says, like, we were talking about how much we loved that music and how rad, there it is again, how rad it would be to have a band. He goes, well, shoot, Gord, you got a guitar. Let's fucking start a band. And it went from there. Went and bought a $25 electric guitar. The brand name on the headstock said Crown, and I took electrical tape and taped out this, so it said "ow," and it had real shitty pickups on it. So I replaced one of the pickups with like a more modern DiMarzio double distortion pickups, and had a Lab Series 5, an L5 solid state combo amp that I bought from some kid at El Dorado that I'm pretty sure stole from a band that was playing a restaurant he worked at. So there was some bad karma associated with that amp that I paid for because I played very loud and it wasn't air conditioned in our practice place. So a couple times the circuit boards literally melted. They fried out. So I ended up paying what it would have cost to buy it legitimately in the $100 here, $100 there to get it repaired every time I fried it out. So Kevin asked Santa Claus for a bass and a bass amp, and then later got a badass bass cabinet, and we were off to the races. His friend in high school, who was one of our skater buddies, Brandon Moss, who David talked about, his dad was the head of the air traffic controllers here in Albuquerque in New Mexico, had a drum set, and he was sort of aware of the music because he skate with us and hear it. And we just indoctrinated Brandon into hardcore 101, and he became one of the most brilliant hardcore drummers in the country, in my opinion. And like I said, I always felt that it was my obligation for my right hand to be strumming as fast as little Brandon's right hand was going when he was drumming. And he was a demon, man. Rest in peace, Brandon. We miss you, buddy. Yeah.
So Jerry's
We've lost
Kids,
a few good ones.
yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah?
So Jerry's Kids,
Jerry.
you'd already been booking shows at other places, so you knew how to get yourself booked, or that's what you were doing?
No. Jerry's Kids came first, but I realized from some of the early shows we played how easy it was for these people that were booking them. And the people that were booking shows then, there was like this guy named Johnny and a couple of, and they were real douchey people and snotty and looked down on us youngsters. But then I realized, I had communication skills. I knew how to use a telephone, and I knew how to bullshit adults and people in authority. I knew some big words. And like I said, I'd tell these people, yes, I'm having a teen dance and there'll be a live band performing and blah, blah, blah. Not saying that live band. It's called Jerry's Kids and Circle of Filth, or some other horrible name. And style of dancing was slam dancing. So it sort of was. It went both ways. There'd be representatives there, and some of them were like stoked. They're like, "Wow, there's a lot of energy, and this is really wild. How looks like you guys are fighting and having a rumble, but not fighting.
But
What?
not.
But not actually fighting." So
Mm-hmm.
that worked in our favor.
How long? So you play a lot of local shows. How many? And then start touring around to different cities around? What was
We
the
would, because
order
of the
there?
lack of venues here and just our philosophy, we didn't want to play more. If we had the opportunity, we wouldn't play more than once a month.
Okay.
And then because of the things we were reading and because of bands coming through here and realizing, oh, there's a band here in Albuquerque, because they would drive through here. I mean, this goes on to this very day. A lot of times we got cool bands playing downtown, Launchpad and Sister, because they're on I-40. They're going from Arizona to Texas. They got to come here, and it's such a long stretch. A lot of times they're actually paying money to spend the night in a motel here. And when they found out, well, shit, we can play our music and stay at somebody's pad and get fed and maybe even paid. And I was always, excuse me, I'm proud of myself. I was always good about paying bands. I wouldn't sign contracts, but I'd tell them, look, straight up, it's going to cost me this much to rent this venue. I'm going to charge this much at the door. When I make my money back, every penny after that is yours. And some of them were sort of skeptical, but everyone always got paid. And the bigger the band, the bigger check they got from me, because they never cost more than 30 to $50 to rent these places. Charge $3 at the door. I'm trying to remember the first time I charged $4 for a band.
But then you decided to start touring just to add in more shows?
Well,
Well, so
well,
you could tour?
yeah. Well, to make money, because the ideas of touring sounded attractive. We'd been putting on bands that were touring, and they seemed like they're having such a blast. And it was also, like, I was in Albuquerque, there was no club like Launchpad or Sister. It was people like me that were renting a union hall or a community center and putting on shows. We wanted to go to cities where there was actual clubs. Whether they served liquor or not was irrelevant, but put on music like we were playing, and that just was so attractive to us. And that was really the main impetus to get out and do our little southwestern tour. Phoenix, Tempe, Denver, El Paso, and then going up the coast all the way up to Seattle, and then cut through Idaho and Boise and Salt Lake, hit Denver, and come back to Albuquerque. And yeah, there's a whole little route where there was clubs, and at a certain point in time, you knew people, either knew people in those cities or you had access to the phone numbers of the people that were doing booking. And what I found is that it was easy to get shows in some of these bigger markets because of the curiosity factor. They're like, Albuquerque? There's a punk band from Albuquerque? Well, geez, let's see what you guys are about. And that was also one of the reasons why we wanted to record, because to get these gigs at these legitimate clubs, we had cassettes, but they didn't want cassettes. They wanted a record. They wanted vinyl. So we'd send them our record out, and they go, hey, that's not too bad. Had the Jamie Trujillo artwork on it and all of that stuff. And it got us out there, and it was a blast. And I miss it dearly. I didn't do it that much with Black Maria. I did it with Cracks in the Sidewalk. We went on the road a bunch. We had a blast. We'd go all the way up to, Seattle, Vancouver, whatever. Black Maria just sort of, we were big on the res. Bands would say, "Oh, we're big in Japan." We were big on
Okay,
the
we're big on the
res.
res.
Yeah, we were very popular with the Dene Navajo Nation. The other guitar player and his brother were the drummers in Black Maria. So they had friends that lived here that were interested in whatever bands they were playing in. And then the natives loved that hard rock. They just loved live music and rock. So it was easy for us to start getting gigs on the res. And so we would joke around and say, yeah, well, yeah, we get a fair amount of people come to see us in Albuquerque, but we're big on the res. And it would be true because, they love live music, and we'd have the gamut. There'd be young kids all the way to, moms with their little babies and grandmas and grandpas that want to go and see live music. They don't care what the style or
Nope.
whatever is. And since Black Maria was like most of my band's real rhythm oriented, driven by the beat, we did well, I
It
guess you could
works for
say. Well,
that.
we got paid. We got paid. They rented motels for us. That was the first in any band I was in. In Black Maria, we'd go out and play in Arizona, play in the res. Not only would they pay us and feed us homemade yummy food, but they'd rent a cheap motel for us. And we were just like, we thought we were Led Zeppelin, man. We thought this is the great, you know? It was great. I mean, the fact that you had people who weren't your friends or weren't from your town that were digging on what you were doing, that was, to us at that time, that was the ultimate. But then to have that other stuff added to it, being paid, being offered a place to stay, like I said, we thought we were Led Zeppelin or something. This was awesome.
How did
So
Practicing
I
the
missed
Sidewalk come about?
Jerry's kids. Kevin was going out with this girl who was moved to Florida to go to med school. And they were real deep high school love and all that. So he moved away out there. Tried to keep Jerry's kids going with a couple other guys on bass, just didn't pan out. So I was just mooking around, skateboarding, trying to figure it out. And during Jerry's kids, I'd mentioned to you, I think that there's a UNM art students were like the main source of parties and places that that kind of music would happen at. And one of the guys that was big UNM art student and in the music scene was this guy named Judd Frondorf, who back then, those guys didn't like the little punks from the Heights, and we didn't like these snotty art students, called them the art fags, politically incorrect. And Judd was one of the big hierarchy art fags, but he was brilliant. He was a performance artist. And for his dissertation or whatever you call it, his final thing was this performance he did called Down Boy Up, where he wrote this really eloquent, he's not singing, he's like giving this oration, but while he's doing it, he's stripping naked and then shaving his body, his head, his body, completely shaving it while doing this. And you know, not trying to draw any attention to his nudity and being very serious with his oration. A lot of the punkers thought that that was gay. I thought it was brilliant. I was like, this guy's a nut. But we didn't really get along with that crowd. In fact, there was a gig that we played at the old firefighters union hall. And I remember Kevin was driving his parents' car and I was riding with him. We're going to head back up to the Heights. Excuse me. Kevin sees Judd in the parking lot walking across to his car to something and like, fuck that guy. And like literally tries to run Judd over. I had to grab the wheel and jerk it away from Kevin because he would have run Judd down, man. Later on, and I told Judd that story. He goes, I believe it. Because, yeah, there was a lot of tension between those two factions of the new wave or punk music. But then having Judd join us, or joining with Judd, who had this band called Down Boy Up. Down Boy Up was his friend and roommate, Ray Abeda, who moved to New York City. Rest in peace, Ray. But Ray became really known in the New York East Coast art scene. He was a really talented artist. So he and Judd started this band. And there was this little high school girl that was sort of like the ingenue of the UNM art crowd, this girl named Jez, Lauren Eve Velasquez, Jezebel, Jez. And so she was playing bass with those guys. And Jez had her friend from high school, this kid named Chris Partain, who played drums and had a drum set. So it was Judd, Jez, and Chris. And I saw them play as Down Boy Up a few times. And Judd, he has it online. He talks about it. His memory is better than mine because he smoked a lot less cannabis products than me, I guess. But somehow Jez and Chris, oh, I remember, I then started playing with this other high school kid after Jerry's kids had broken up pre-cracks called the Pepsi Generation. Okay. Ian Parks was the kid. His mom actually was the first, the Sunshine Theater early on was leased by her and she put on shows, but she would go walking through those shows going like that. She hated the music, she hated the volume, but through them, we practiced in the basement of that Sunshine Theater, which I think is now some sort of venue into itself. But that was where Cracks and Sidewalk practice. We practiced there with Jazz. She found religion, went born again, reborn Christian, quit the band, was real critical of the whole scene and critical of all of us as musicians and what we were playing because she was swept into that born again thing. And we were like, well, what are we going to do? We need a bass player. Well, in Jerry's Kids, when we were first started practicing at the university in the art department, there was like a office or a studio that was available to practice in, and there was a band of cool guys, a couple of UNM students. They had a band called AKA. They were great. They sounded a lot like the Minutemen or Gang of Four. They had a real sort of trebly poppy sound, that real syncopated. And one of the guys in that band was a guy named Mike Rose, whose girlfriend was a big early part of the scene via the UNM art students. Her name was Dee Dee Wigley. And she had this boyfriend up in Portland she was always talking about. She's going to bring him back to Albuquerque. She's going to get a band formed for him. So he moved down here, got a job actually working for a carpet cleaning company where one of the Jerry's Kids homies worked at Billville's carpet cleaning, and started this band AKA with Matt Somerville and Mike, two excellent musicians, a guitar player and drummer. And Mike, who we ended up calling Mo, was their bass player. And we shared his practice place for a little time at UNM. And then when that ended and we all got kicked out of there, that was when Kevin's parents said, well, you guys can play in the garage here. Before I stole, they were putting new mattresses in the dorms at UNM. This would probably get me put in jail, but they had all the mattresses stacked out in the parking lot in the dorm. And we took Tom Mulberger's brother, Joey, had a van. We took that van and we just filled it 2 different trips with all those mattresses. So the practice room was totally lined and ceiling mattresses, brand new mattresses that we robbed from the university. But you know what? Fuck you, UNM. You never paid me what I was worth. I gave a lot to you guys. And I took a little bit back in return. We had this practice room, and so AKA started practicing there as well, the band that we were practicing at UNM with.
Okay.
And so we need a bass player. And I don't know what inspired me to ask Mike or Mo. And I said, hey, other than I knew he was an excellent musician, he played up in cover bands up in Portland. He was one of those musicians, he could hear a song once, maybe twice at the most, and could play it.
Just play it.
And so, and he dug what we were doing. He dug our energy, even though our song structure was rather rudimentary and crude. He seemed to dig on that. So when I asked him if he'd be interested in playing bass with us, he's like, fuck yeah. Mo was known for his vocabulary being fairly limited to the word fuck. There's a video of Cracks and Sidewalk playing on a public access show, and Mo's wearing a shirt that says, fuck. It's not just a word anymore. He loved that word. It got us in and I got him a job working with me at the university, at the med school. And he was always getting in trouble because he'd be offending people because, oh yeah, I think that fucking thing came in, I don't know, if around fucking 10:30, fucking 11 o'clock. I can't remember when the fuck it came in. I mean, he could not stop saying fuck in every sentence. So anyway, not that has anything to do with anything other than Mike Rose, brilliant musician. I miss you so much. He was from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and series of events led him back, and he's back up in Green Bay. And we are moderately in touch, corresponding and emailing, but we got real close, and he's one of the main reasons that Jerry's Kids went from being a cool punk band, elevated us to a fucking kick-ass band, period. Because he had the chops, and he was willing to share his musical knowledge with Kevin and I so we could play better. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that, but all right. Gordon Andrew Anderson, also known as Gordy or G, taking a break. I think this is the booze that did most of all our peers in. The hard drinking just destroyed so many people.
Oh, Gordy's a very attractive man. In fact, just do the Gordy interview. He started Jerry's playing in 1980. Invited me. I was their second singer. Kevin and Gordy invited me into the band in early '81.
We were skateboard buddies.
We were all skateboard friends, old friends, and we started playing. We were playing covers. They already had some originals. We were playing a few originals. We were playing Adolescence covers, Circle Jerk covers, um, covers of covers, covers of covers, like Wild in the Streets by Circle Jerks. And yeah, we were influenced by a lot by the hardcore that was starting up to come out of California, and it wasn't really called hardcore yet, but it all happened really fast as far as hardcore goes. It really spread all around the country really fast, and every town city had a hardcore band. It was kind of samey, kind of samey lyrically and stylistically, pretty samey, but they were all good. Every band was good. Every city had a good, really good band, and we were Albuquerque's. It was kind of like doo wop music, as far as it was a real grassroots thing, and it was all homegrown. Every town had one, because a lot of them came through here and played. Like I remember this band Red, White, and Gray from Minneapolis came through, and they were really good. We had Social Unrest come through pretty early on, and they were really good.
No Trend was good.
No Trend was later, a little later, but they were a little different. But anyways, yeah. So we started playing then, and
What was the year? Tell me. So 81 is when you joined the band.
yes,
So that was the year that hardcore exploded all over America?
I'd say so. Yeah,
Really? And your influences were what? Gordy just snatched you up off the street and was like, "Hey kid, sing for this band."
yeah. Our influences were, the hardcore punk that was coming out of California, and also our own influence as friends. The appeal was it was really fast. It was really physical. It was kind of oriented toward rhythm and not as much melody, but like really tight, percussive, fast rhythm. And when we played like really hard, and we sweat a lot when we played, and it was like really cathartic for all of us when we played. So that was the appeal, really, the intensity of it. You know,
It
we
felt
weren't
good.
more than musicianship. We weren't playing Mozart or anything. Obviously, it went along with the dancing. The slam dancing was new. So it was all new and it was ours. So that was what was cool. We we weren't relying on booking people. Local booking. Queen bees or king bees of the scene, like nightclub owners. We weren't relying on any of that. We just were doing our own thing. We found our own places to play. We played at house parties, and yeah,
So then where were you by 1982?
we were still in Albuquerque, but we were playing. And we'd make occasional road trips out to like Tucson, Phoenix, Denver, El Paso. But Albuquerque, everything's far away, so got to go 8 hours to get anywhere. So, we went where we could, where our various jobs would allow us. We didn't do any super extensive touring, but we played a lot in the garage, just for our own entertainment.
And this
You know,
is Kevin's garage.
yeah, in Kevin's parents' house, their garage. We lined it with mattresses. It was kind of our little clubhouse. Kevin had a skateboard ramp in the backyard, and it was all happening there.
How old were you in 1981?
81, I was 1 year out of high school. Yeah, so whatever that is, 19, 20. I remember I turned 21. I was in Jerry's Kids when I turned 21. My brother took me to a strip bar. I think it was TD's. It was in the Heights. I think it was TD. Because there's one, and it says still flow, still
Yeah.
flow,
It's
still
the
flow.
chapter one. Chapter. Gordy says you're fabulous at writing songs. Rad, actually,
Um,
rad. The word was
he
rad.
says that, but lyrically, it was nothing. All that it was pretty simple. Like lyrically, we had a lot of songs that those guys all wrote too. Like I might have written like half, maybe 2/3 toward the end, but they already had songs when I
Mm-hmm.
started with them. They were writing lyrics. Kevin was writing whole songs. Gordy wrote some whole songs. Brandon wrote some whole songs. So I mean, so those are really simple, very simple lyrics. So there's nothing like nothing literary at all.
I'm gonna
I don't
pull
know.
him back into this
Really,
video so he can debate that.
I might have delivered them brilliantly, but they weren't written really, really brilliant. But I mean, like I said, there was a lot of bands, hardcore bands, who were like samey. We all had songs about Reagan. We were all in the same milieu, and because Reagan was newly he was new, and he came in, and when he fired Patco, that was kind of had some personal impact. Because Brandon's dad was an air traffic controller, actually a supervisor, and his workload got really stressful after that. But yeah, Reagan, as far as I'm concerned, was the beginning of a lot of shit, a lot of shitty stuff. A lot of privatization of things, and just anti-union, just really bad. But in a way, that was the thing, to be anti-Reagan. That was typical. And so every band had an anti-Reagan song or two, or even an anti-Reagan name for the band. But like I said, most every band was really good.
One from
Whatever.
each city.
What?
One from each city.
Yeah, every city had one or two at least really good bands that no one really will hear of again much. That's all right. That the impact and the influence is far reaching. I mean, there are people who no doubt became successful business people and politicians even, and who carried a lot of that ethos with them. I'm sure for no matter what they did. So um, it's not to say that the impact and influence isn't alive, but just the bands, were there were a million of them. I mean, they're Jerry's Kids. There was a Jerry's Kids in Boston. There was one in Texas, I think, at one time. And that happens a lot, like same names for bands or whatever. But that doesn't diminish the merits of each one of those bands necessarily.
Not at all. How were your fans? How was the Jerry's Kids fans?
Bands were all our friends, and then as time went on, people would just kind of got to know people through the band, but a lot of it was just a ring of friends, troublemakers, just drinking a lot of beer, being belligerent, kind of going against the grain. Like we were kind of like, we'd crash shows or crash parties, and get chased out of frat parties. Got chased out of a couple of frat parties. We played in one backyard party in Valley. I forget whose house it was, but I remember they were kind of looking at us weird, like, because I mean, it was so weird. The music was just so different at the time. At first, people had never heard, something that was just so kind of non-musical. Just like, like I remember we played. What were you asking me? I remember we played
That's what editing's for. Keep on
we
talking.
what was I going to say? Oh yeah, that one backyard party. The grass was wet, and I got shocked by the microphone, and I saw like blue lightning bolts coming out of your eyeballs. Like, it was gnarly.
Yeah, I remember that now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, we played this one show at Isleta Pueblo, and probably '82, and it was in the daytime. We played the show. It was pretty fun. But then that following week at the restaurant, I was the cook at a restaurant, and this guy was a new dishwasher, and he came up to me and he was telling me about the crazy band he had seen at Isla Pueblo. He didn't realize that I was, you know, so I got to hear like a straightforward, honest, and he was like a drummer, Neil Peart disciple, and he ended up he was the drummer in the Angry Babies, actually, very talented drummer. But that
Really?
was
What did he say about your show?
Oh, it was so different, He's like, oh man, he went out of his way to talk about it to me, just some guy he just met at work, he's told me how crazy weird this band was, to his ears, he had never heard music like that. To him, it's just like a bunch of noise, probably. But 'cause he was like a guy, you know, tried to cover Rush songs on his drum set. He's very disciplined type, practiced. But
Asking a
yeah,
lot.
so we were just kind of like hardcore punk was radical at the time. It was
It's
radically different.
radical.
Yeah, it was radically different than any other rock and roll that was going on. It was kind of a it was kind of a reaction to all the stadium rock that rock and roll had gotten to this point of excess. It was just like looking at these little tiny people down up on the stage, and we used to sneak into concerts just for something to do. Like Tingley Coliseum. So I saw a million concerts here. Like you name it, Foghat, fucking Blackfoot, Kansas. All that shit.
We went to all of them.
Yeah, thud rock. But so it was in a way. So we were like we were complete opposite. It's all about sort of immediacy and intimacy, kind of, because a lot of kids hadn't seen really live music up close. They're always in a concert setting where there's like a barrier between an audience and the band. So it was all fun for us because it was all just like wild.
When did you guys start talking about making your record?
Probably early on, but we just had to pool the resources. Like Gordy, Gordy and Brandon we were all gainfully employed, but Gordy is the most. He had like the band, and so I wound up borrowing $1,000 from the bank. My mom underwrote it, $1,000 loan. Woo,
That's a big deal.
yeah.
That's a big deal.
That was just to get the records made, but then I think everyone pitched in for the actual recording, but the people who recorded it were like didn't have a clue, about they were like recording commercials for radio and stuff like that. Those kind of guys, and they were kind of like indifferent, really. They were just kind of so. Considering that, it came out pretty good.
Uh-huh. It wasn't exactly a punk rock production studio.
Well, no.
They wanted to isolate each.
They wanted to isolate all the tracks.
Oh, that's right. I remember you telling me that.
Yeah, so they were like not hip to the recording a live thing. But
Not really their stuff. What high school did you go to, Dave?
I went to Highlands my junior and senior year.
Okay.
Yep.
Where were you before that?
Before that, I was in Portugal for a
Really?
year. Yeah. And then before that, I was at Manal for a year.
Okay.
Before that, I was in Long Beach. Grew up in Long
Cool. California, and you just get dropped to Highland High School.
Beach. Grew up in Long Beach till I was 14.
Oh. I'm assuming you're a skateboarder, surfer? How's that story go?
Well, it goes like when you start surfing, you quit Little League. They fuck
Okay.
off, and you want to quit school. It's a lot of fun. Once you start doing it a lot, you start having a lot of fun. Skateboarding was just kind of part of the surfing thing.
No kidding.
But yeah, we started skateboarding. I have a picture of me skateboarding, so we were doing it pretty early. I mean, we thought we were hot shit. We were pretty hot shit. We used to ride drainage ditches in LA, and when we came out here to Albuquerque, we saw these incredible ditches that were like way better than any ditches we had skated out in California. So we saw this ditch, the Bear Canyon. We're like, whoa! So we went home and made longboards long, like 40-inch, 45-inch mahogany, you know, shape it yourself, glue gravel
Really?
on the back,
Okay.
So we brought those back to the bear, and we were skating the bear and blowing people's minds. All the skaters here were like riding little plastic Genentech boards. So me and my brother were like some kind of like gods, to the people. But we met Gordy. That's where we met Gordy, the bear.
Okay.
And he was like a few years older, and he's also smoked herb and and skated. So he was like we were fast friends with Gordy.
Jeff Beck.
He was our ticket off of Manal. We went to Manal school, right? And we didn't drive or nothing, so we were kind of trapped there, except for Gordy. Gordy was our way out of that world,
Gordy had the van.
Gordy had back then a Ford Fairlane back then, but that was like 76, 77. Yeah, so it was a few years before the band, But the band was about skaters from that time. Gordy, Kevin, Brandon, they were all skaters at that time too, So, but meanwhile, they had become like the younger guys had become better skaters than I ever was. Kevin was doing amazing stuff on vertical. He was sponsored at one time. He was really good. He got good at making ramps, building them. So he had like this incredible ramp in his parents. So that was a lot of fun.
The skateboarding and the music are they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, yeah, especially as hardcore,
Yeah. And
like
California.
fast and hard.
So before that, Gordy was listening to Jeff Beck before
Yeah, well,
you
we all
guys
listen. I mean,
rock.
Gordy had an extensive. He was a big fan of music in general.
Okay.
So he
Okay.
was hip to all kinds of music, and I was getting hit. He was a little older, like I said. Um, he was always hip to a lot of different kinds of music. When he played his guitar, he was like a rhythm machine. He was like, I don't know what you call it, white James Brown, kind of like. I mean, the guy was one of the best rhythm guitar players that I've ever played with.
That's cool.
Yeah, so Gordy's always been hip to the music. Yeah,
Did you have musical influences before that?
yeah, but they didn't really come out with the hardcore. I mean, with the music we started playing, it was like, yeah, the volume came out, but I mean, I had sang in the shower a little bit. I was into blues. I love blues and rock and roll,
Really?
like
Okay.
basic rock and roll and like blues. I saw Muddy Waters play at the Golden Inn once, and it was just an amazing show. It was really, really amazing. Just some shows like that were like up close and personal. Not like the arena.
Not the arena rock.
Yeah, so you realize how powerful it can be.
I've been told on more than one occasion Dave Duran was the best punk rock singer ever to come out of Albuquerque. That's the exact words. I can look it up in my recordings if I have to, but most people
But he was
say
the
that.
best third baseman that's ever come out. Yeah. Well, it's like to be honest
Doesn't
with you,
compare though. A lot of people
yeah,
really
to be
like how
honest with
you
you,
sing.
like I've never been like Mr. Melody or Harmony, but I always had an intensity, and that's what kept carried me. Just I was always really into it. And I was always like I said, it's very cathartic for me when we played, and also when you're just singing and you just have a mic, you don't have to play an instrument. You can make contact with the crowd much easier. So that always was easy for me, and it makes it good. Makes it fun. Just like if you're in the crowd, if you go up front and really connect with the band, watch them just play better
Yes.
immediately.
Yes.
So I mean,
Yes.
the crowd makes a big difference. But it works both ways. Bands used to come through here and just comment on how great the crowd was. Might be a small crowd, but it was always really intense. Like people were really into it. They weren't standing against the wall in the back, trying to talk, over the music or whatever. So yeah, it's all about intensity and getting into it. You just get into it. Because I mean, when we played, we didn't. I mean, we're the fucking we're what's happening. We wouldn't rather be anywhere else. And why would you play any differently? That's my attitude. Is like, and so it's bound to be at least good because of that. I mean, regardless of the material,
Yeah.
it's gonna come through. It's gonna be fun.
Well, and the perfect kind of music to have a
Yeah,
reason to be
that's what
intense.
punk rock is at its essence. I think just about that enthusiasm. The intensity of it. It's like, fuck it. We're here, we're playing, and let's do this. And then
This is
same with the audience. It's all about your attitude. I mean, we weren't trying to be anything but what we were, and we thought we were pretty hot shit at the time. And you should, you should play, you should care about what you're doing. I mean, there's shoegazer stuff. I guess that's a different kind of intensity, but
I feel like we were always playing for each other more than
yeah, we played for each other.
trying to impress
Like when we played, we practiced. We played just as hard at practice as we would at a show. Because I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that was the
there's no such
point.
thing. There's no such thing as dress rehearsals.
No.
It's like
what?
you're not saving. Now that goes for life in general. There's no trophy dinner at the end of the year. It's like you're not saving it for some other time. It's like, oh, like let's just go half speed. It's like no.
No. You like that at everything in your life?
Whether it's 5 people or 500 people.
Bring it. Bring it.
Yeah.
Bring it.